Okay, hello. Let me know if you guys can hear me. And we should get started. Right. Sorry for the late start. Um, just got home. We were out. Traffic. Everything's opened up, so that's a good thing. Okay, cool. All right, so we last left off on I showed you an example of changing the status code. Okay, so the way you change the status code is, again, we have this response object. You can see here that the type is the server response. So this object has a bunch of functions and methods that we can use on it. One of the things that we can do is there's this property here. You can see it's highlighted right here, property. It's a status code, so we can update it. So we can change it to 400, for example. So again, 400 is an indication that somebody tried to do a request to your server, but maybe they were trying to request, let's say, a resource that doesn't exist, so it's a bad request, stuff like that. Okay. I then showed you, what if you had a JavaScript object? Let's say you pull this from like a database like MongoDB, okay, and it gives you a response as a JavaScript object. So you want to serve this back to the client. Somebody's requesting this, right? So you want to send it back. Now, what you need to do is, if you have the object, all you have to do is run Json.Stringify and then pass the object, and this gives you a string, and so we can write that directly. So a better way to probably see this is, have a variable called JSON, set that equal to Json.Stringify, and we pass in whatever JavaScript object you want. That's going to convert the object into a string in a JSON format. If you hover over JSON, you can see it's a string, because Stringify converts a JavaScript value to a JavaScript object notation, which is a JSON string. And then we can write that to our response, and then we end the connection, and that ends the request response transaction. So then that's finished. Okay, and so that works, but the problem is that you want the client or whoever's doing the requesting to know how to interpret the data. And so the way you do that is with a header. So this is setting the content type header to application/JSON. Okay, and so what this does is it lets whoever is going to receive the data in the HTTP body how to interpret it. Right? We could have easily have said, oh, this is going to be XML, or this is going to be text/HTML, or CSS, something like that. But this is a JSON. So this is what you what they call a MIME type. So you can Google what MIME types are. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Okay. Now, let's see this in action again. And so the way I was showing you this was through Postman. So we would do a simple request. Remember, this is always going to start a server on localhost. Okay, and then the port is just 3000. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. It'll always start off at localhost. Okay, always. Okay, so we have localhost and the port's 3000. So we'll change this to 3000. Then we'll hit send. Oh, this is HTTPS. I'm sorry. I was doing something else earlier. Okay. There we go. Then we get a response back, okay, which is this person object. Okay, but remember, we're getting it as a JSON. You can see right here. Now it's showing it's a 400 bad request because we set the status code manually right here. I could have easily have put this to, like, say 500, and so we'll kill this, run it again, and that'll generate us a internal server error. So you got an internal server error of 500. Okay. So again, these codes and everything you do is literally meaningless, right? There is no like, it's not gonna crash if you send back data, but you also say a 500 request, right? That stuff is not going to break anything. The only thing that's going to be a little hard, well, whoever's going to be consuming your API is going to complain to you, be like, hey, why did I get a 500 server error, but you send me the data correctly, right? And so again, it's not going to crash like a typical program that you write in Java or in Python or anything like that. It's not going to crash if you mess up these headers. It's just whoever's consuming your API is going to get undefined behavior. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the status codes that we use is appropriate for the responses that we're going to send back. Okay, so just keep that in mind. There's nothing stopping you from giving a 400 all the time. It wouldn't make sense, but there's nothing stopping you. Okay, that's why I mean by all of this is like, it's arbitrary. But if you follow the conventions, you follow, the guides and like how these things should be done, then your API is going to be really, really nice. Okay, so I'll just remove this. By default, if you don't specify a status code, it will always be 200. So if I don't specify one, and then I kill this, and I run it again, and I hit send, notice over here it's going to be a 200. So by default, we're always going to send back a 200. Okay. Now, so we talked about routes, what they are, and how we can how we can serve different resources based off different requests. So we've talked about it, theoretically through the slides, we've talked about it, but now we need to get our hands dirty. So let's build some routes. Okay. So at the top here, I'm just going to write some comments. Okay. Let's pretend, okay, let's pretend that, we are, a social media website. Let's just say, suppose. Okay, let's just say we're a social media site. Okay. And so we have users, right? So there are users. Okay. And again, don't worry about authentication, any of that. Let's just forget about all that. So we want the ability for, some third party to be able to access the users that are using our social media site. Okay, that's it, nothing more. So we need to have an API endpoint, a URL that we can tell developers, hey, this is the domain, and by the way, if you want the resource for the users, this is the endpoint you have to hit, and then provide these query parameters or anything like a API token or something like that, and that's about it. Okay, so if we want to get users, notice that is plural and user is a noun, person, place, or thing. That's actually a perfect use as an identifier in the resource URL that we're going to build. You'll sometimes hear it, I think nowadays they actually say to call it a URI, a universal resource identifier. But when we talk about web, it's fine to talk about it as a URL. Though technically it is a URI. All URLs are URIs, but not all URIs are URLs. It's weird. So it would make sense that we would have a path called /users. Okay. And here we would say this endpoint sends back all of the users. Okay, let's just say, okay, let's just say that was the case. Okay, and then suppose you wanted to get a user, like a very specific user, a very specific one. How could we get that? Well, we want to reuse this user's endpoint, but we want to be a little bit more specific. Okay, now there is multiple ways to solve this problem. One way is through query parameters, such as this. You'll start with a question mark, so throw in a question mark, and you could say something like user ID, right? Equals, where XXX or whatever is the user ID, right? So this is totally an option, right? Because the query parameters is basically saying, hey, get me all the users, but in particular, just send me this person, this user ID, okay? This is a total valid way. So essentially, this endpoint gets all of the users, but filters based on the user ID query parameter. That's totally valid to do, okay? It's not the standard way, but that is a totally valid thing to do. I wouldn't do it this way, but it is valid. So what would be a better way then to do something like this, to handle something like this? Well, the better way would be to do something like this. You say users slash, and because if you think about it, a profile is itself a resource, right? It's just a resource. And by the definition of REST, every resource must have a unique URL that is associated with that resource. Okay? That is, that no two URLs could ever point to the same resource. Okay? Or else the URLs are not pointing to a very specific resource. Okay, so you cannot have /apples /bananas both point to Bob Dylan, the person in your database. Okay, you can't do that. Okay, the way you extract specific resources should be deterministic. Given a URL with all the appropriate parameters, you should always get the exact same resource back, if it exists, that is. Okay. So an appropriate way to do that is, okay, say you have all these users, right? We have all these users. You would then associate an ID. So you would pass in some kind of ID as the resource locator. Okay. And so here we would say this endpoint gets a user based on the ID. Okay. We'll talk more about these. These are dynamic paths. We'll talk more about that next week when we hit Express. Okay. And so what if we wanted to create a user, right? What if we wanted to create a user? Okay. Let's say we wanted to create a user. Well, again, it makes sense that we still use the /users endpoint, right? Because this has to deal with all the users. That's the noun, okay? But in here, we can create a user. So we can use this endpoint. We'll create a user given a JSON body, okay? So check this out. Okay, we're going to, make this one not a thing. Okay, this is a way to do it, but again, I wouldn't recommend doing it this way. So we have this user. This endpoint sends back all the users. We could also say this endpoint gets all the users. So you can all capitalize it as it gets, so you know what kind of verb we're talking about. So this users /users URL gets all the users. This endpoint gets a user based on the ID. So this is called a dynamic URL. We're gonna see that in action. And then this endpoint will create, okay, will create a user given a JSON body. And notice that we keep reusing the same resource, right? We keep reusing it. So how can we distinguish, between these things? Okay. And on top of that, let's say we wanted to have, another URL that was like, let's see, you have users. Let's say we had one called /admin. So, this endpoint gets all of the admins. Okay. So we have, essentially these resources, these URLs, okay, is a path, but somehow they're supposed to do different things. And then this is a completely separate path, okay? And so we only have one function here, right? That's going to be responding to these requests. So how can we handle these things? How do we handle it? Well, we're going to handle this using the idea of routing. Essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to inspect the request, see what it is that the requester, the client, is asking for. And then we're going to send those requests. We're going to route them to a specific, part of our code that can handle it. Okay? So first, let's start off with the basic thing, but the easiest one. Okay, so let's say we have this /users and /admins. How can we distinguish between the two? How do we distinguish between the two? Well, if we inspect the request object, there is a .url. Okay, we have this .url. So let's see what that looks like again. So console.log request.url. Make sure that we do an end. Make sure you call end, or else the connection will not terminate and the client will hang. Okay. All right, so let's run this. And now we're going to rerun this. And you can see we get nothing back. Okay. It ended and we sent nothing back. However, we printed to the console on the server side, we printed that out. We have, this was the URL that that the requester used. Okay, so if I were to do /users, okay, cool. I can see that we have /users. Beautiful. And if I were to change this to admin, if I hit send, we get admin. Okay, so far we seem to have a way, right, to be able to distinguish between the two. Cool. What if somebody sent you some query parameters, like, let's say they say sort equals ascending. Okay. Well, hold on. We still have the admin, which is good, but this entire thing is one string. And so we have these query parameters that are now part of the URL. So if I wanted /admin, now I'm going to have to do a bunch of string manipulations and try to parse out just the /users, right? This is a problem, okay? So how do we solve this problem? Well, we need something to parse out the URL. That's what this node module was for, okay? So now I can say I'll create a, I'll call this parsed URL is equal to the URL module.parse. And this just takes in the URL string. So we're going to extract that from the URL, the request object, use the URL property. And then the second option is going to ask you, would you like to parse out any query parameters? And the answer is yes. We're trying to separate them. Okay. So we're going to hit save. We're going to kill this server, clear the console. Now that we have this parsed URL object, okay, instead of saying request.url, we can now say something like parsed URL dot path name. So we're going to log that to the console. So we're going to run the server again, go to Postman, send the exact same request. But now instead of getting all the query parameters associated with it, if there is any defined, we always just get /admin. So this module is able to parse out any of these query parameters. This way we know exactly what was the path that the person was trying to hit. Okay, cool. So now that we have that, We're going to kill this now. So now that we have a way to get the specific path name that we're requesting, well, now really it's up to you to figure out how you want to do the routing. Okay, so one way you can do this is just using a switch statement. So we can say switched, parsed URL, path name, and you can say, okay, in the case that they are requesting /users, we can do something here, right? Go into database, extract all of the users, prepare the request response, send it back. Okay, again, these are all steps that you could do, okay, for users. Now, if it's the case that they are trying to hit admin, okay, then they want all, okay, it's admins, so they want all the admins. So again, we basically do the same thing. Go into database, extract all of the admins, prepare the request response, and then once that's all done, send it back. Okay, so we've been able to now essentially route these requests into two different branches. Either you're going to the users branch, you're trying to get user resources, or you're going into the admins. Okay? And if you know about switch statements, then you know we have this default case. So in the case that you send something like /apples/bananas, our server has no idea what that is. So if this is the case, then we say something like prepare a 400 bad request response, since the path name is not something our current server supports. That is the resource the client is requesting. We do not have because it does not exist. Okay, they're asking for something we don't have. Like they say /pizza. So it's like, sir, this is a Wendy's, right? Or something like that, right? Like, I don't know what you want from me, right? So it's a bad request. Okay. Okay, cool. So let's try this out. Let's try this out. So what we're going to do here is if they say /users, then all we want to do is, just for now, as a demo, we're going to respond back. So we say respond.write. And all we're going to say is, here are the /users. Okay. And then we're going to say, we don't have to say respond.end because it's going to end right here. So we're just going to write something into the response, and here it will end. Okay. So now here we're going to say, okay, if they ask for /admins, what do we want to do? Well, we say response.write. Here are the /admins. Okay, cool. Now, in the case that they asked for something that we cannot serve, our server has no idea what they're talking about, right? Our server is Wendy's, and they're asking for pizza. It's like, I don't know what you want me to do, right? That's not going to happen. So we're just going to say response.write. I don't know what you are looking for. Okay. Okay. So to be you know, correct, quote unquote, more correct. So far, we can say that this response is okay, right? Okay, we know what you want. You want the users. Okay, that's good. We understand that. In the case they want /admins, we say, okay, yeah, we understand what you want. You want the admins. Okay, cool. And then in the default case, meaning all other paths, we can bunch together into this one route, funnel them all together and say, I have no idea what you're looking for. Okay, and then we're going to terminate the connection here. That's all this does. Okay, so let's run this. Let's go to Postman. Here I have /admin with a bunch of other junk, but our current logic ignores all this stuff because we already parsed out the query parameters and we just have the path name. So if I hit send, it says, oh, I put admins. I had to put with an S. I put admin. It was plural. All right, hit send. But notice how it works. Look, I don't know what you're looking for. If I do with an S, here are the admins. Okay, so let me remove this to make it look cleaner. And so if I asked for, say, the users, hit send. Here are the users. Okay, cool. So it knows what I'm talking about. If I say something like tuna, my server's like, I don't know what you're looking for. Okay, but here's the problem. I'm telling you I don't know what you're looking for, yet if you look at the response here, it says everything went okay. You see how this doesn't match up? I'm telling you I don't know what you're looking for, yet I'm also telling you that everything went okay. Okay, this is the part where I say you're confusing the person that's consuming your API, because here the message says that you're using this API incorrectly, yet I'm sending you a 200 OK response code. This is bad, right? So how can we fix this? Well, if we know that this is a bad request, it's standard practice to update the status code on the response, so response.statuscode, and set this to a 400. Essentially, this is saying it's a bad request. So now if I kill the server, clear the console, run it again, and now if I request tuna /tuna, I hit send, okay, not only do I get the I don't know what you're looking for, but I'm also sending back a 400 status code, which is saying, hey, this is a bad request. The request cannot be fulfilled due to bad syntax. In this case, this /resource is bad syntax. This doesn't exist. The server doesn't know what you're looking for. I don't know what you want. I don't know how to handle the /tuna resource. I don't know how to get it. I don't know what it is. Okay. Again, the servers are really, really dumb. They don't know a whole lot. They only know what you tell it exists. And that's it. So you have to programmatically build out this entire routing system in order to go and locate the resources that you're saying actually exist. So backend development can be pretty tedious, okay? And there's a lot that needs to be thought of, especially when it comes to like, how do we send back, responses letting, the client, the person that's consuming our API, that the resource that they're requesting doesn't exist. Or if it does exist, what should that look like, right? Okay. Okay, cool. So now let's actually do something useful. Okay, so over here at the top, I'm gonna create a const. I'm gonna call this I'm gonna call this my database. Okay, and this database is just going to be an array that's going to have just a bunch of users. Okay, so let's say the ID here is that's the ID, and then f name, call this Bob, L name, call that Dylan, and we'll say something like type, and we'll say Bob Dylan is an admin. Okay, let's create another ID, some random stuff there, f name. If you guys want to put some names in the chat, by all means. So we'll say what's another name that I can use? Jane, and then we'll have L name over here, Smith, type, we'll say this is a user, whatever that means. Here's another ID, Okay. F name, Peter, L name, oops, Parker, type, there's another user right there, ID, oh, can't have letters, just gonna use numbers in there, okay, F name, John Cena, all right, John Cena, hopefully we could see him, right? Hopefully we can see him. John Cena. Elon Musk, all right. Should he be a user or should he be an admin? So we'll say John Cena is a user as well. Shouldn't be that many admins, right? There's just a couple, you know. So yeah, Elon's pretty smart, right? I think. What do you guys think? Yeah, he's pretty smart, right? So we'll make him an admin. Let's say he's, you know, doing this. So we got Elon, L name. We got Musk up in here. Musk, there he is. Type. We'll make him an admin because, yeah, let's just say. Okay, cool. Here's our database of. I honestly don't know what this is. Like a database of people. Some are admins, some are users. That's my database. Okay, so let's make it clear. This is my database. All right, cool. So pretend that this is my database. How can we send this information back? Right? Somebody's looking for the users. Well, here's my database. Pretend, you know, this is a Mongo, a Mongo database. Okay, in my cluster here, I have this data. Okay, so how do I get this out? I need to get this out. I want to just get all the admins. And I want to be able to extract all the users, okay, based off these requests. How do I do that? Well, let's start with the first one. Now here I say go into database, extract all of the users, prepare the request response, and then send it back. So let's do the first part. Let's go into the database. Well, beautiful. I actually already have access to the database here, so that step's done. Nice. Now we need to extract all the users. Okay, we need to extract all the users. Now, if you're using something like MongoDB, it's very easy. You can add some filters. If you're using, MySQL, SQL Server, or Oracle, any kind of SQL language, anything that has to do with like queries, you can always add some constraints like where type is admin, blah, blah, or users in this case, blah, 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 blah. We just have an array, right, of objects. Okay. So in JavaScript, the way we can do this is using a filter. So we say const users makes sense, right? At this point, we should have all the users. So this is going to contain the results of my query, all the users. So it's going to be equal to my database, which is an array of JavaScript objects, which are my people, dot, we're going to use a higher order function by passing it a predicate that will filter out only the objects that we want. Okay, so here's a filter. So we're going to filter and we got to pass it a predicate. So given a person, or we can call this a resource. So given a resource, okay, you want to send back true if you want to keep this resource, if you want this resource. You send false if you don't want that resource, meaning it doesn't meet your criteria. So in our resource, if the resource.type is a user, you can see here again in our data, we have this special metadata right here, this type that basically tells you what type of resource this is. So this is an admin, this is a user, this is a user, this is a user, this is an admin because of the type. Okay, so I'm going to go through every single resource in my database. If that resource's type is a user, I want it. So if this is true, it will be part of my array here, this array of users. Beautiful. Okay, so now that I have that, I now need to prepare my the request response. Okay, so what I can do is I can say const convert this over to JSON. So we use json.stringify the users, and now we write just the JSON back. There we go. So we use the filter, which is a higher order function. We pass it a function that's called a predicate that's going to give us a resource, which is basically a particular object here. And then it's going to allow us to inspect one of the properties. In this case, all the properties have this type. So if that type is a type of user, right, then that's going to return true. So the filter will store it and it'll be part of our final results. Okay, so if we hit save and we run this, and we run node app.js, okay. Now if I go over here and I say /users and I hit send, here we go. I have my array of users which are users. Okay. Now what's the problem here? The problem is I didn't specify what the content type was. So again, by default, it's going to be text. So we want to let the client know, whoever's going to be consuming our API, that, hey, by the way, I sent you back JSON data. So how do we do that? We do that by updating the headers on the response. So we're going to say response.set header, which one? Content type. What's the type? Application/JSON. Okay, we're going to kill the server. We're going to run it again. We're going to try this request again. Now we're going to say /users. We're going to hit send. Beautiful. Hey, look at that. Now it's even like formatted all nicely. And look at that. It picked it up as a JSON. Beautiful. And look at this. All these people here, all these resources are type users. It's a type of user. So now we only have the user, right? So you can imagine if you had like a social media site or something like that, you wanted to get the people that were following you, or you wanted to see all of your friends. How would you do that? Well, you need to filter, right? You got to do some kind of filtering, some kind of conditional, right? Because you can go into the database and see all the people, but you don't want all the people. You just want the people that are your friends, or the people that are following you, or whatever, right? Well, this is basically what you do. This is an oversimplification, but this is the basic process. All right, so let's try to do the same thing for admin. Okay, so we've got to go into our database. Well, we just so happen to have access to our database already. It's this, right? That's our database. Very simple. Cool. Okay. Now we want to extract all of the admins. Okay. So we're going to say const admins is equal to, we're going to go into our database here, dot filter. Okay. Each one of these objects, we're just going to think of as a resource. So that's my resource. Again, you can call it whatever you want, but I like to think of it as just a resource. That's all we're doing, right? Remember, RESTful is just representational state transfer. We're just transferring about the states of resources. That's all we're doing. Okay, so if the resource dot type is a type of admin, then yes, I do want it. Yes, give me the admin. That's what I want. Filter out just the admins. Everything else I don't care about. Okay, cool. Now that we extracted all the admins, we have to prepare the request response. We have to prepare how we're going to send this back. So we're going to convert this to JSON. So we're going to say const JSON is equal to json.stringify the users. Okay. We then need to set the appropriate headers. In this case, we just need to set one header. So response.set header. Whoops. Set header. content dash type. Application slash JSON. Cool. And then we write into our buffer the JSON information. Oops, I put users here. This should be admins. My mistake. Kill the server. Run it again. All right, so here are the users. I hit send. Cool, I got the users. Now if I change this to admins with an S, hit send, I get the admins. Beautiful. See that? Amazing. Simple, yet effective. Is this making sense, everyone? Are you guys okay with this? Do you guys have any questions about this so far? So far, so good? No questions? So everybody gets this. You guys are all pros at this. Okay. 3D says it makes sense. All right. Makes sense for 3D. Makes sense to me. Cool. All right. Again, I am showing you a very thin little slice here, right? Now, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you guys a question. Do you think this is scalable? How we're doing this right now. Do you think this is scalable? Right? Like you're going to have a bunch of switch statements, you know, like a bunch of cases, case this, case that, you know. It's going to get kind of nutty. Okay? For example, what if we wanted to create a user? So 3D says no, since we are repeating a lot of things. Yes, we are repeating a lot of things. Like this part right here, the users, the filter. A lot of this, it seems like can be, you know, maybe simplified a little bit, right? So yes, there's a lot of repetition here. So we'll have to fix that. Okay. All right, so far so good on this. Okay. Now, what if we wanted to create a user? How do we create a user? Well, let's think about it. Let's think about it this way. If I were to switch this verb from get to post, let's say, just for example, is there going to be any change? Yes or no? Let me know. What do you guys think? Is there a difference if I change it from get to post? Based off the code that I wrote, is there going to be any difference? I should probably show you the code, right? Based off this code right now, is there any difference if I change it from a get request to a post request or a put request or a patch request? Is there any difference if I change the HTTP verb? Is there any difference? Nobody? Take a guess? No? Okay. Well, the answer is that no, it's not going to make a difference. If I change this from a get request to a post request and I hit send, it works just fine. If I change this to users, works just fine. If I change this to a delete, oh my God, it says delete, hit send, works just fine, right? I didn't put any logic to handle these different HTTP verbs, these different methods. I haven't added any code to that. Again, the status codes, the HTTP verbs, all these kinds of things is completely arbitrary. If you don't put any logic in place, it doesn't matter. There is no magic, right? There's no magic that just magically codes this stuff, right? Like, your server is really, really dumb. You have to give it all the logic, all the intelligence in order to route your request and do things not only based off the resource that they want, but remember that the verb also matters. There's a difference between trying to get all the users and then trying to delete all the users. These are two completely different actions. They're not one and the same. Sure, they're targeting the same resource, but the action that you're doing on top of it is completely different. So 3D says, I thought it was pre-implemented, but this makes a lot of sense. Yes, you have to handle all of the edge cases yourself. You have to do all of it, all of it. When you're working on a backend, there's a lot of work that has to be done, a lot of work. Okay, so let's try and now make this a little bit better. Okay, so let's say that we know how to handle /users. Okay, but we don't have a mechanism just yet on how to delete a user. Okay, so we want to handle the different verb types, the HTTP methods. So we're going to use another switch. Now, how do we get the verb out, the method? That's part of the request. So we say request dot method. Okay. In fact, before I do that, right here on the server, after I spit out the path name, I'm also going to spit out the request. So request dot method. So I want to also spit out the method. So let's open this up, kill the server. Okay, I'll clean this up. Node app.js. Okay, so what's going to happen now is once I hit send, it's going to tell me the path name, and it's also going to tell me the method. What was the method that you tried to execute your request with? So if I hit send, notice on the left side, I have /users and I use the get request, which makes sense. There's the get request. Now let me change this to a post. I hit send now, and it's like, okay, you tried to hit the resource /users, and you tried to do it using a post request. Okay, let me try do a put. Same thing. Patch. Same thing. Delete. Same thing. And again, and it makes no difference because there is no logic to handle any of these different requests. So if I do /admins, it's the same thing. /admins delete, /admins get, post, put, patch. You know, these are the ones that you're going to be doing the most of. And look, it does absolutely nothing because we haven't written any code to handle these cases. Okay, so let's write those cases. All right, so if you're requesting the users, what do we want to do? Well, for now, we know what to do if you're just trying to get the users. So we're going to say, okay, if the request.method case is a type of get request, well, we know how to handle that, right? We know how to handle that. This is the code to handle a get request. So we're going to just cut this out and put it in here. Okay, let's format this nicely. Okay, we know how to do a get request. Yes, we know how to do that. But for now, we don't know how to do anything else. So we are going to do a default inside of this switch. So we have a nested switch statement. We have a switch inside of a switch. That's totally fine. And so now what we want to do is we want to say response.status code is equal to a 400. Okay. I'm going to say response.write. We're going to write in here /users does not support, okay, space. I'm going to append to it the request.method. Okay, that way we can be a little bit more explicit. Okay, so we're going to kill this now, run it again. So again, to reiterate, we have a switch statement inside of the user's case. What we're going to be checking is we want to switch on the method. So if it's a GET request, do this part. Okay, execute this code, which is good because we know how to get a user. However, if they try to request the /users with any other type of method, currently we don't support it. So if they try to delete /users, there's no way we can handle that because we don't know what to do. So then what we want to say is a 400, so switch the status code to 400, and then we're going to write in the response body, we're going to say /users does not support, and then we're going to use the plus sign to concatenate the two strings because method is a string, whatever the method was. Okay, so let's try this. So let's go to users. So that's where we're testing currently. /users, hit send. So let's start with the GET request. Okay, cool, that worked. We got all the users. That works good. But what if we switch it to a post? This is something different now. Now we're getting a 400 bad request, and we say /users does not support post. Very good. Right? See, before, you could have done a post, you could have done a put, you could have gone to delete, and you would have always have gotten the users. But now we are putting barriers. We're putting, guards in place to be like, hey, if you're trying to do this thing, we don't know how to handle it. So we're going to give the client more information to act on. Basically saying, hey, this resource, we know what you're talking about, but we don't know how to take this action, like a post. We don't know how to do a post on users yet. That stuff isn't implemented yet. That feature has not been coded yet. Okay, so let's do the same thing for admins. Let's do the same thing for admins. So this is the code that we would need to use in order to get the admin. So we do support get as of now. So we're going to do a switch statement on the method inside of the admins case here. Okay. So inside of the switch statement, we're going to say case. They do a GET request. Okay. They do a GET request. We know how to handle that. We're going to cut this out. We're going to paste it in here. Let's format it nicely. Okay. So inside of admins, if we know that they're trying to access admins, we're then going to run a switch statement to check, okay, well, what kind of action are they trying to take? Oh, they want to get it? They want to get the admins? That's fine. I know how to do that. But for now, the default is, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how to do that thing on the admin's resource. So we're going to say on the response, we're going to change the status code to 400 saying you're trying to do a request that is bad because we don't know how to handle it just yet. So response.write, we're going to say /admins does not support plus the request.method. Okay, very similar to this. Okay, we're going to save that. We're going to kill our server. Run this again. Now let's try it on the admins. So we're going to switch this to a GET request. Change this to admins. Hit send. Cool, we got the admins. Beautiful. But now if I try to say, switch it to a delete, hit send, now we get admins does not support delete. Okay, we don't have that code yet. We don't have that logic. That route, as we say, that route has not been built yet. Okay. Is this making sense, everyone? Are you guys okay with this? Does anybody have any questions? Let me know if I'm going too fast, or if you have a question, please ask, right? Please ask. So is everybody okay so far? We're good? Nobody has any question? Jim Bob, you're good? Alex, good? 3D, good? Everybody good? Victoria, good? Anybody else? Everybody good? Good? We just need to implement the routes that are necessary. Yep. Or yeah, the ones that we can do as of now. Right? Because, you know, let's say you're working for a company, right? You get hired and you're like, hey, we're going to put you on the back end because you have experience with JavaScript and we're going to be using Node.js. Right? And yeah, so you're working on the back end. They have all of these features that they want, but obviously you can't do them all in one day. It's going to be a slow rollout, right? You're going to be adding features, you know, different resources, how to access them, how to manipulate them and stuff like that. So it's a slow thing, right? You're going to be doing a little bit here, a little bit there. But at the same time, the people that are writing your front end would also like to, you know, connect to the back end so they can at least test some things, right? Okay, no worries. So let's say there is a /users, and let's say that's up and running, right? So you know how to get the users, okay? But let's say the front end also has the ability to get a user that is very specific, like the user with ID, you know, 1000 or something like that. But if you don't have that logic there yet, you need to tell them, be like, hey, I know what you want, but I just can't, I don't support that yet. Like, at least not yet. That's totally something you can put in the response back to the client, right? You could do a 400 bad request, and then in the message, in the body, you just say, this route currently right now does not support delete. You know, maybe even add a link, like an internal document that has a roadmap of the different features and like when they when will they be patched in, right? Stuff like that, right? Again, depending on what company you work for, they're going to have a workflow for that kind of stuff, okay? But you still want to be able to test the endpoints, at least the ones that are up and running. You still want to be able to test them while you're adding new features on top of it. So this is something you can do, okay? Again, depending on what company you end up working for, you know, they'll have a thing like, they'll be like, yeah, this message right here is not enough information. We got to give them more information. Put this link to show in the roadmap when those features will be coming in the following patches, like what day, what week, what month, what year, what quarter, blah, 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 blah. Okay? You can totally do that here. You could totally do that here. Okay. Now, let's say that you want to be able to add a user. We want to be able to add a user. Okay? So now we finally have the technology to add a user. So how do we do that? Well, the way you do, you know, adding a brand new resource, okay, when you want to add a resource to your database using a RESTful API. Again, the database has nothing to do with the REST, okay? We're just talking about like, how would you add a resource? Like, let's say a new user. How do we do that? Okay. Well, the HTTP method that you should be using is called a post. Okay, it's a post. So there's our switch statement, and we use a break. Okay. So when we say post, you know, let's say you're working and you're talking with one of the engineers there, and you're like, hey, how do I create a user for this API? They'll be like, oh yeah, just post a JavaScript, post a JSON object with the following properties, and they give you like a list of properties that you need to submit. They basically gave you all the information you need. right? By him or her telling you, hey, you post the data that's a JSON object and it has to look like this. Okay, cool. That's really all you need, right? They gave you all the information. So the information is a post. So remember, a get retrieves resources. A post will create a new resource. Okay? It's going to create a new resource. Okay, so now how do we do that? How do we get the data back from the body? So let me show you an example of what I mean by that. So let's say under the users, we wanted to add a new user. How do we do that? What would that look like? Well, we would need to switch this to a post because it doesn't make sense to use a GET request to create something. Okay, the verb that we use in the HTTP world is a post. So we use post to create a user. Now I said that you need to send data over. Now how do you do that? Well, you do that through the body. Remember, the HTTP packet has a body section. That's where you put data. So if we click on the body, okay, let me scooch this down here. Okay, if we click on the body here, we can add information in here. Now there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. One is through like a form data. So if you were doing this using like an HTML page or something like that. But the other way you can do it is by doing something what we call raw. So you go over here and you type in raw. So you click on raw. And then you say exactly how you're going to send it. Oh, we're going to send some JSON. Okay. So then in here, you can add a JavaScript object notation object. So we can say, we're going to create a new user. Okay, so if we go over here, what do our resource require? They require a name, so a first name, a last name. Do they need an ID? Well, yes. Yes, they do need an ID. Are we the ones that are going to create the ID? Right? From the client side? No. The server will create the ID. Not us. The server. Okay? All right. So all we need to do is provide it the first name and the last name, and then we will create the user. Okay, so let's do that. So we say fname. Okay, let me blow this up real quick. Fname. So we're gonna call I don't know, what's a name that we can use here? I don't know. What was it called? What was his name? Dave Bautista? Have you guys seen My Spy? That was a pretty funny movie. Dave Bautista was in there. Bautista. I think that's how you spell his name. Hopefully I don't get it wrong and Bautista bombs me, but I believe that's his name. Dave Bautista. Very funny movie. Okay, cool. So there we go. We have the data we want to send. Look at that. It's not scary at all. Very easy, very simple. Okay. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Okay, so let's say we want to create Obi-Wan and then Kenobi. Cool. There we go. All right, there's our data. We want to send it. Now, how the heck do we get it in our server? Now, how do we get it in our server? Well, what's really cool is if you say request dot, there is a where is it at? Where is the did they change it? Okay, so we're going to extract this ourselves. So we can say request.on, and then data. It's going to feed us some data. And then here's going to be the data chunk. Okay. Okay, so, all right, this looks really weird now, right? Okay, so, all right, let's talk about a little bit of like Node.js. Okay, So Node.js has a special class called emitter. Now, an emitter emits events. Okay, that's all it does, is it raises events. So one of the things that a request can do is raise an event when it's detecting that it's receiving data. So we can say request dot on. Okay, so this is how we can register onto this emitter. One of the particular events that we want to listen on is this data. We're going to receive data. Now, why is it doing it this way? Okay, why do we have to wait until data comes in the request? The reason why you have to do it this way is because it's 100% possible somebody tries to upload a a video file to you, right? They try to submit a video file. It's not going to fit in one HTTP packet. It's going to get fragmented into multiple packets. And so once you receive all the packets, well, as you're receiving the packets, you're going to be getting the data in chunks, not the whole thing. I think it's something like you get 4 megabytes or 8 megabytes at a time per packet, I believe. It's something like that. You can actually change that based off the server. You can actually change it in the server how much data can come in the body. Okay, that's a server thing. It's also a client. How much can the client actually upload at any given time per packet? Okay, so it has to fit both client and server. But anyways, as data comes in through the stream, as you start to receive data in chunks, okay, this event is going to have is going to call a function that's going to give it that data. They call it a chunk. Okay, but you can call it whatever. You can call it data or a chunk. It doesn't matter. Okay. So this event gets raised whenever data is received from the request stream. Okay. Now we also need to know, right, when all the data has come in. Okay, when fragmentation has ended. Okay, if you take CSC 138, which is networking and stuff like that, networking devices, I forget what it's called, but that networking class, they talk about HTTP packet fragmentation. If the packets are too big, if you try to send too much data, they will get fragmented. Okay, hopefully you guys paid attention to that. You probably would have thought, oh, I'm never going to use this. Well, we're using it right now, right? We're working with a backend. You have to understand fragmentation. Now, what's cool is we don't have to handle any of that low-level transport logic. We have these beautiful events that Node.js has created for us. So all we have to do is listen to them. Okay. So this is going to get called every time a fragment has come in. But we also need to know when there's no more fragments to consume. So we know when to stop reading the data. So we say request.on. We listen for the end. When there's no more data chunks coming in, then this function will get executed. Okay, this function will get executed. So here, in this function, gets executed every time a new chunk of data is received. Gets executed once, gets executed after no more data chunks are expected. Right? We actually know, right? We actually know, based off the headers on an HTTP packet that has been fragmented, we know how many fragments should we expect. It actually tells you in the HTTP packet. It'll actually tell you. So once Node.js has received the final packet, it'll raise the event end. There's no more data. So the way you would handle something like this is you usually have a variable on the outside. We'll call this let is equal to data, or I'm sorry, let data equal to, and then we'll just, it'd be like an empty string. Again, the data that always comes in is just going to be some kind of string. So we can say data plus equals chunk. So here we're basically, we're putting the data together, okay? Because they're coming in as chunks. So here we're going to put the data in together, okay? These chunks, okay? Now, once all the chunks have been added to my little data here, okay, my data object, once they've all been added, now I can do something with it, okay? For example, here I'm just going to say console.log data. That's all I'm going to do, okay? I'm just going to log to the server whatever the heck it is that I received. Okay, so I'm going to kill the server, clear the console, run it again. And then on this post, I have this data here. When I send it, I should expect to see it here. Hit send. And there it is. It's right there on the left side. You see that? This is the data that I received. And I received it in chunks. Now, does this look like 4 or 8 megabytes worth of data? Right? Does this look like 4 or 8 megabytes worth of data? I forget how much the chunks are per HTTP packet. This is not 4 or 8 megabytes, right? That's not it, right? So how many chunks how many chunks should we expect to have for the payload that we sent? Like 1, right? So if we log this, console.log, we can say something like receive chunk. We should expect to see that only once. So we're going to kill this, run it again. Here we go. We're going to send that. And it says right here, receive chunk. And it only happened once, right? It only happened once. Okay. Now, what happens if I switch this to text, just to make this easy? And then I just start just typing a bunch of stuff here and just, and I copy this and then I paste it a bunch of times. Paste, 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 paste. Look at all that. And then I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy this. And then I'm going to paste it a bunch of times again. All right, so we're at 7,000 lines with, I don't know how many characters that is. Okay. I don't know how many characters that is. So here, we know we're getting the data, so I'm not going to log it. I'm just going to say here, data extraction complete. Okay, I'm going to kill this server real quick. I'm going to clear this, terminate it, clear it up. Oh. Node app, runs again. Now, I am sending about 7,667 individual lines of varying text. Imagine this is like a textbook, right? Okay, I'm going to send this. How many chunks do you think I should have? Right? What do you guys think? 1, 2, 3? I don't know. 7,000 is quite a lot. Hit send. All right, so it says 1, 2, 3, 4. We got at least 4 chunks out of 7,667 individual lines of varying characters. I honestly don't know how many characters this is. Okay. Okay. But yeah, so that ended up being 4 individual chunks. Okay, so does it matter? Yes, it actually matters, right? So we have to make sure that we listen for every single data chunk that comes in. We put it together, and then once it's done, we can then do something with that data. Okay? Okay. So there's a reason why it has to be done this way. If not, if we didn't do this, if we didn't observe for every fragmented data that came in, we would only have parts of the data. So imagine if you were running a social media website and somebody uploaded a file, but you didn't listen and wait for all the data chunks to come in, right? Like let's say a typical image is like 5 megabytes, but the chunks are coming in as, say 1 megabyte. So that's at least 4 chunks of 1 megabyte data sizes, right? If you only listen for part of it, you're only going to have the first megabyte of the image. So the image is going to be corrupted. So you have to make sure you take precaution and that you extract all of the data before you do anything, right? Before you do anything, okay? All right, so let's delete that. Switch this back to JSON. We're going to be sending back fname. We're doing ob1 l name Kenobi. Okay, send that. Only one data chunk. Receive chunk. It only happens once. It's very small data. Yeah, only very, very small data. Okay, cool. All right. So we have it. We have it. Okay. And we've already printed out before, so we know we have it. The thing is, how can we use this? How can we use this? Well, the cool thing is that it's a what? It's a JSON string. So all we need to do is parse it out. So we're going to say const. We're going to say, we're going to call this, we'll just call it raw, is equal to json.parse. We're going to parse out the data. Okay, remember the data is a variable that we created here. So this is a container to contain all of the chunks of data received, right? This is going to contain all of the data, okay? And then in here, we're going to be slowly, every time a new packet comes in that's part of the fragmentation, we're going to be putting it together. And then this gets called once no more data is expected to come back. Cool. And then, again, because we are the ones that are expecting it, we're expecting that the body is in a JSON format, which is why we say json.parse. But we'll see what happens when somebody doesn't send us back JSON. So I just want to log this out. So I'm going to log out raw. So I'm going to kill this console, run it again. I'm going to hit send. Okay. Now you'll notice that there's a difference between how we logged it before versus how we logged it now. You'll notice that the console has these pretty colors. This is telling you that this is actually a JavaScript object. If it was JSON, there would be quotes around the property names, okay? And the strings here would not be color-coded. They would not be green, okay? So this is a JavaScript object. That's how you can tell. That's one way, okay? The other ways you can tell is that the properties do not have, they don't have quotes around them. That's another way you can know. Okay, cool. So now that we have this, okay, now that we have that, very cool. So what else can we do? Well, we want to be able to add this into our database. We want to be able to add it to our database, okay? But what's the thing that's missing here, right? So they sent us the f name and the l name, so that's good. But we also need to set the type. So how can we add a property to our user here? So I'm gonna change the name here to user. So this is the new user. So that's it. We'll call it that. New user. This is a new user. Okay. So we say new user dot type because they're trying to add it to the user's endpoint, we're going to add the type to be type user, right? Because if we look at our, fake database, right? Each resource here has a type, okay? Some are admins, some are users. So we're going to add the user to this one because this is under the /users path name, the resource. Okay, cool. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions? No questions? Okay. We're a little over time, but we're almost done. Okay, so the last thing is we want to just create a user ID, a random one, say. So we say new user dot ID is equal to. Now, we don't want somebody here to send us an ID. That doesn't make any sense, right? The server should be creating these IDs, okay, randomly. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to say math.random. Okay. I'm going to multiply this by, I don't know, that. And then we'll do math.round. So math.random is going to give you a number between 0 and 1, like a decimal, like 0.01, blah, 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 blah. This is going to be the maximum number. So I'm going to scale it up by this big number, and I'm going to round it because I want a whole number. Okay, so this will, again, there are various different ways you can create a random ID. This is not the best way, but let's just say just for the sake of argument. So this creates a random ID for the new user. Okay, we might get an existing ID in the database. Exactly, Jim. Exactly. So what would you want to do is you would want to do something like while new user.id exists in database, construct a new ID. So what you would want to do is you would want to check to see if this ID already exists in the database, and if it does, generate a new ID. And you keep doing that until the ID you generated is valid. That is one way. Okay. For now, again, we're not going to do that just now. We're going to hand wave this a little bit. Cool. So now all we have to do is say database dot push this new user. So effectively, we have added the new user. Cool. So how do we respond? How should we respond? Well, it's standard practice that when you create a new user, you return that new user as a response. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to say const JSON is equal to json.stringify the new user with a brand new ID, and the type has been added to it as well. We're going to say respond.send, or sorry, respond.write the JSON. Okay. Now, again, it's in JSON, so we have to also set the header. So response.set header. Which one? The content type. What's the MIME type? Application/JSON. Beautiful. Beautiful. And if you guys remember, under the status codes, if you look under the successful ones, there is a special 200 that you should send back when a new resource has been created, and that's 201. So it says here, the request has succeeded and a new resource has been created as a result. This is typically the response sent after a post request or some put requests. So what do we have? Do we have that scenario? Yes, we're sending a post request. We're trying to create a new resource. If we are at this stage, right, we were able to add the database, add the user to the database, then we have in fact successfully created and added a new resource to our backend. So now what we can also do is we can say response.statusCode is equal to 201 created. We're basically telling them, hey, the resource that you wanted to create, thumbs up, created successfully. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So now let's run this. We're gonna run this again here, but now let's check this out. I'm gonna hit send on this post, hit send. Oh, got an error here. What happened here? Oops, okay, yeah. So the issue here that happened is that these happen asynchronously. So these are what's called async. Okay, so the data stuff happens asynchronously. So what's the issue here? Well, the issue here is that this is going to not return immediately. It's going to take some time. The problem is that down here, we are always ending the connection no matter what. However, because this task could take some time, it's not going to return immediately, we ended the connection. However, the connection is now dead because we killed it, but this asynchronous task got called, and then we tried to write to a connection that was already dead. So what needs to actually happen is that now that our application is starting to get a little bit more complex, we cannot willy-nilly end the connection. We have to end the connection at very specific points in time. For example, here, at this error stage, we can go ahead and end the connection. That's totally valid. We can end the connection here. Okay. Where else can we end the connection? We can end the connection right here, and this at this other error, we'll end that connection there as well. Okay. Where else? Okay, inside this GET request, we will end the connection here. Okay. At this possible error here, we will also end the connection there. Do you see how you have to end it at very specific points in time? Because you'll have situations like this where something can take a lot longer than you expect. For example, you do a lookup in a database. That can take a while, right? Especially if you have a bunch of requests coming in. That can take a while. So you don't want to end a connection until you are ready to end the connection. So we're going to end the connection once we are ready to serve the rest of the stuff. Okay. So the last place we need to end the connection is in here. So you can see this can be kind of, you can create bugs very easily if you don't understand the asynchronous flow, right? Some tasks may take longer than others. And when those cases arise, you cannot end the connection until your asynchronous tasks have either completed successfully or have failed. Okay, so now if we run this again, we should not receive that error anymore. There we go. So now we have a brand new user with, and if you can see we returned 201 created. Beautiful. We got back the new user as a response. So ob1 Kenobi type user, and there's the ID. Okay. Now what's really cool is if I go to the get request, I switch this to a get. Okay. It doesn't matter about the body. I have a get request now. If I hit send, look at that. In my database, we now have ob1 Kenobi. Awesome. So Jim Bob says, my database isn't retaining the new user. Each new user replaces the previous one for some reason. Okay, make sure you are using push. Make sure you use push and not concat or something like that. Make sure you're saying database.push. And also, make sure that your database is a type of array. Make sure it's an array. Okay? The objects must be JavaScript objects like this. They should have these curly braces. Okay? And that should be it. Let me know if you still have issues. We can debug it afterwards or anything like that. So now we have a way to create users. So we can post. Let's post a new user. Let's say, I don't know, we have Anakin Skywalker. Okay, we're going to create a new user. Hit send. We get the new user back as a 201 created. Basically saying, hey, here's the new user. That's a type of user. And here's their ID, 81578. Beautiful. I can now prove that I have Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker in my database by doing a GET request against the users. If I hit send, this gets me all of the users, right? All the resources that are type user. And now we have Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker in my database. So, can you see what we have built here? Can you see how you could now use this, this basic logic here to actually create a database that can actually contain users? Now again, where do you store the users? It doesn't matter. You could store it to a file. You could store it in a database. You could store it on a floppy disk. It doesn't matter. Does this API care about that layer, like the way I'm using it? Absolutely not. So if we refer back to the slides, when we were talking about RESTful, and we talked about, the client is agnostic to the different layers of the server, this is what we mean, right? This is exactly what we mean. When I said that I wanted to create a user using a post request, so let's say we wanted to create Luke Skywalker. So now we create Luke, hit send. Where in here, in the headers or in the body, did I indicate that it had to go inside of MySQL database? Did I ever talk about that here? Do you see a reference to the data type, right? The storage type. Do I make a reference anywhere here? No. Why? Because the client is agnostic to the layers on the server side. The only thing the client knows is the API. The API is the application programming interface. The interface that we are using in order to interact with the resources is these URLs. The URLs, we are able to say, hey, I want to target this specific resource. And the action I want to take, I specify using the verbs. That's it. These are these abstract ideas. Remember, I told you, and I showed you, and I proved to you that these verbs, okay, these verbs here are arbitrary, right? Earlier, when we just had users and admins, and that was it, you could use a post, you could put a delete, and nothing happened. Nothing happened, right? Because they're arbitrary. You have to respect them. If your server doesn't respect them, you're going to get undefined behavior. We don't know what happens when you try to delete all the users and you don't handle that case. It's undefined behavior. There's no way for us to know. That's why we call it undefined behavior. However, if you understand, right, if you have the API written right in front of you. It's all documented saying, hey, if you want to create a user, use the /users and send in the payload a JSON data that looks like this. It has to be this shape. That whole idea, that whole documentation is the API. That's the application programming interface. My client right now is Postman. But later on, now that we know how to work with React, we're going to come back to React. We are going to build a front end that is going to consume the backend resources. My front end is never, ever going to make a reference to any of the layers in the backend. The only thing that the client needs to know is the API. What are the resource URLs that I can target? What are the actions that I can use on those endpoints, those targets, those resources? And is there any data that I need to send in order to fulfill my requests? All of that needs to be documented somewhere, right? You write it down on a website and you send it to whoever's going to consume it. That entire idea, all that is the API. So whenever you're going to like a recruiter and they ask you, hey, can you explain to me what an API is? You'd be like, yeah, an API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is the interface that a client and, maybe a server, let's say the example of a server, how they're going to communicate in order to share resources, right? Because the client wants to request resources and might want to mutate those resources. So by having a unified API, both the client resource and the server can communicate about resources. That's the entire idea of an API. It's completely abstract, right? I'm targeting this URL. Do I make any mention of Node.js? Do I make any mention that's going to be using JavaScript? This URL, we could totally use this and build a backend using Python. We can then switch it to Java. We can then switch it to C#. Heck, if we're crazy, we can use Rust or C++ and build the backend that way. It doesn't matter. Why? Because when we're talking about RESTful APIs, the client is agnostic to the layers of the backend. That includes non-functional things like the programming language, right? We don't know. We don't care. As long as we know what are the endpoints, what's the domain. The domain here is localhost. The port is 3000. The protocol is HTTP. The protocol could be HTTPS. That's possible. And then if we know where the resources are, /users, /admins, stuff like that. If you have that, that's the API, right? As long as we know that and the actions that we can take, that's all we need to know. And then if we're going to be sending data, what should be the shape, right? What should be the shape, right? That entire idea, that's what's going to get you the job. If you want to get the job as a backend developer, those are the core concepts that you need to understand, right? We've touched on a lot of these things using very simple, very simple demos, very simple examples. But if you've been following along, if you've been trying this stuff out on your own, then you can kind of see where you can take this. Now, next week, I'm going to show you a very popular framework called Express, which is going to accelerate the speed in which we can actually build these APIs out. It's going to accelerate it dramatically. So with that in mind, there is in the slides, okay? In the slides, I think we are ready now. Based off today's session, you should now be able to do this last part. Okay, this should take you all of the entire weekend right here. So I want you to do this, and yeah, I want you to do look at these last 3 slides. So let me push this over here, bring this over here. Okay, based off what we have done today in today's session, you should be more than prepared to do this part, okay? So once you finish this part, okay, once you finish this part, I give you the code that I wrote. This is the way that I did it. Again, it's not the right way, it's not the wrong way, it's a solution. Okay, there are many ways you can do this, infinitely many. So here I show you the code. I don't want you to look at the code until you've done, until you've tried it, and then you started pulling your hair out. Once you get to that point, look at the code, right? And try and figure out how close were you, and try and see why you were wrong or why you weren't getting the proper results that you were looking for. Okay. Then this will take you the remainder of the week. So, you could probably try this today and tomorrow, and then on Sunday you should be able to try this one, and this should be a lot easier for you to work with. However, this might be a little bit more tricky, but you should be able to do all these two assignments over the weekend. Please, please, please do them. Please do them for your own good. Please do them. I can't tell you, I really can't tell you the number of times I have told my friends, you should try this, you should learn about this, you should really, 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 really practice this. And they don't listen. Then they want to go and get a job. They talk to the recruiter. They ask them questions on the stuff that I told them that they should study on and they should work on, and then they don't know how to answer anything. Right? Don't be that person. I am telling you right now, 100%, I can guarantee you that if you can do this assignment through this weekend, you're going to be prepared to at least get the interview if you talk to one of those recruiters during those, what is it called, those job fairs. If you can do this over the weekend, if you walk into any of those, job fairs and they ask you questions, these basic questions, you will be prepared than anybody else there that hasn't been coming to this or hasn't been doing, their homework on their own time, doing something. I can guarantee you, because I have seen it time and time and again, that when I tell people you should do this and they don't listen, it always comes back and it bites them in the ass. So I'm telling you, please, 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 if there's any assignment that you should do, it's this one. This is the most important thing that you're going to learn here. It's this, because this is the future. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is the future. I have been doing countless different interviews. I've been seeing my friends do countless interviews. It always boils down to this exact same stuff. Please, please, please do these assignments, at least this one, okay? Because this is going to be the difference between you going up to a recruiter and feeling confident versus you going up to a recruiter and then you turning around in shame because you can't answer these basic questions when I have clearly laid everything out here for you and you can totally do it. And you have the Discord, you have the YouTube chat, ask questions. This is what's going to get you the job, right here. If you can't answer these questions, the recruiter is not going to give you the interview. I can guarantee you. Please, please, please do this over the weekend. Okay, rant over. Now, Jim says, could you post your code on Discord? Code you did today, not the assignment code? Yes. Yes. Yes, I can do that. Okay, so I will grab all of this, copy it, and I will post this onto Discord. And I hope that if you have listened to my little rant there, that I should see a lot of you guys asking questions, right? So you guys should be asking a lot of questions, I hope, on this assignment. Okay, it's a very easy assignment. One of the easier ones. Things are going to start getting a little bit more complicated because that's just the nature of backend. Some things are going to be a little bit more different. But with the introduction of the Express framework that we're going to be using next week, it's incredibly popular. You have absolutely no idea how popular this framework is. And let me just show you, so to give you an idea, so you can see that I'm not like giving you bullshit here. So Express, let's see how many times this freaking framework is downloaded. This has 13.5 million weekly downloads. This is an incredibly powerful, okay, and also very popular framework for Node.js. Okay, this is not bullshit. I'm telling you stuff that's going to get you a job. If you want to work as a backend developer, you have to know Express. Like, this is one of the modern frameworks that is used exclusively everywhere now. Okay, a lot of companies are moving towards something like Express because it's very fast. It's very easy to scale. Okay, with node clusters and stuff like that. It's a very good framework. Okay, so please, please, please be prepared for next week to learn Express. This is going to, you know, get you over the edge. Okay, all right. Again, 13.5 million weekly downloads. This is a popular framework. This is a good framework to use, and oh my gosh, it's so easy to work with, and I can't believe more people don't know about it. All right, rant over. I will see you guys next week. Use the Discord, ask questions to solve, you know, the assignment that I have assigned. All right. Thanks everyone. See you guys on Monday. Have a good weekend. Bye.